tapestries and just as little threads. Gina takes my bar class, like little threads there. And I have couples here from my church, and God wove us together with Mindy with Jenny through Jem. And just to see how our lives interweave is a beautiful thing. So my name is Heather Nations, and I originally moved to Gainesville in 1990 as a college freshman pre-med major. Grew up in a Catholic home. My father's actually Jewish, so I am one of God's chosen daughters, but my mom married a Catholic when I was 8, and I was then raised in the Catholic Church. God put on my heart when I was about 14 years old, spontaneously, that I was not to join the Catholic Church. I actually went to my parents and said, I will continue to go to church with you until the day I leave your heart, but I just feel like there's something missing. Little did I know that I would find something missing very few short weeks later, and it would be this young man, David Nations, that I met my very first week of orientation, that would first invite me to church. And I was saved at First Assembly of God the very first time I heard my gospel. My heart was so soft for it. God at that point had very much protected me. I'd grown up in a very moral home. I really had a really strong set of values. Point of trivia, I started going to First Assembly the same week that Michael Patz did. For those of you that know Mike Patz, we are in the same class, and my husband is the young man who knocked on the dorm room of Mike Patz the day after his conversion and said, why don't you come to church with me? So, that's very cool. So, but I want to set this up because I want you to know the kind of man that I married. I knew within weeks of marrying David that he was it. That he was the one, and the light that shone in him for Jesus was so attractive to me. And he did and does love God with all his heart, which when you come before this, I think I'm getting ahead of myself, but to know that I am not here to shame or condemn. I'm going to talk about some really hard things tonight, and I'm here with my husband's blessing. He would have been delighted to be here with you tonight. But we are parents of 4 beautiful children, and our third turns 16 next month, and she wanted Pentatonics tickets so bad for Sweet 16, and so Daddy drove her to Orlando. So he's busy being that. So anyway, I met David. We were actually married between my sophomore and junior year of school. We lived in married student housing. He went on to get a degree in engineering. I got one in occupational therapy. 10 months after I graduated, I had our first child, so my full-time career as an OT was very short-lived. He continued on to get his master's degree. We had a second child, Joshua, very shortly after, so Josh is, Rachel's now 20, she's a senior at MIT. I cringe, she went to school at 16, so homeschooling does work again. So Joshua is an almost 19-year-old sophomore at Florida Southern in Lakeland, majoring in athletic training. Hannah is a sophomore in the IB program at Eastside High School. And my baby is 11. My Michael, he's about to start junior high, so I see all these precious babies. And we moved away from Gainesville in 1997, shortly after Joshua was born. We had been attending family church at that time. And we proceeded to live around the country. And circumstances of our life, through God's timing, would bring us back here about 2 years ago. Tom brought David back close to 3 with a job, but the children and I followed 2 years later. Occupational therapist by training. I've worn the hat of homeschooling mom. I have been a childbirth doula. I've attended over 150 births now, so lactation consultants and development I'm great for. Got to homeschool, been a public school teaching mom, a fitness instructor. And my next step on my journey is I was accepted to the College of Medicine, and I will become a physician assistant in the next 2 years. So I feel like I've lived a very full life. I love being back in Gainesville. When our baby was a year old, I developed synovial sarcoma, gray stage 3. It's normally a fatal cancer. It has less than a 2% survival rate, yet here by the grace of God I stand after 6 excruciating courses of chemo. And I think when I went through that at the time, I thought it was the worst thing that I would ever have to walk through. I mean, I thought that, this is going to be the great trial by fire of my life. For Pete's sake, I wrote a Christian book about it. It got published. I was on a speaking circuit. And I thought that that was going to be the worst thing that ever happened to me. But it wasn't. It was just a step in preparing my heart and reducing my pride for what would come. And what would come, you'll get a copy of this later tonight. This is the Cliff Note version of my husband's testimony. But 2 years after my recovery, My husband received a 5-day suspension at work for viewing pornography on a work computer. And what would follow then was a cycle of blame, accusation. He went into a Christian recovery group. And long story short, he relapsed less than 3 months later, and he lost his job. He was out of work for 18 months. And between the cancer and the moves and the long-term job loss, we lost everything. We lost our entire life savings. We foreclosed on our home. So we have paid very deep consequences. Interestingly enough, we talk about the enemy coming after you, not wanting to shine light. I was trying to process my student loans for medical school today, and my federal loans have all been denied due to my foreclosure. And so God is going to open up another way to pay for medical school. But I think it brings about a very valid point that we do walk out the consequences of other people's sin in our own. So I'd like to shine a little light tonight on what it's like to live with this and just to maybe dispel some lies. So the first lie that I'd like to get rid of is that Christian men are not involved with pornography. Thank you. Right. My husband loves Jesus with all of his heart. He accepted Christ as a child, and to look at us, we were the perfect Christian couple. We waited until we were married. We did all the right things. But as you go back to the roots of my husband's issues, which included same-sex attraction, pornography, these issues, along with crippling mental illness and depression, surfaced as early as 5 years old in his life going back. So we as a church have chosen to segregate sexual sin over in this special little lockbox where we look at it as something that is not, and I'm so grateful for your eye contact right now. It's something that is exceptionally dirty. It's exceptionally bad. One thing that I've had to learn is God is not up there with the scale measuring sin. Just like no woman chooses voluntarily. No woman wakes up and says, I want to be a prostitute. No little girl dreams of saying, someday I'm going to have an abortion. I don't think any man thinks, someday I'm going to be so controlled by my compulsive need to gratify myself that it is going to destroy everything I stand for, that I'm going to live in such a spiral of shame that I would consider taking my own life and leaving my wife with insurance money rather than having to face what I had to face. And this is where my husband was at. So lie number one. You know, even had my husband chosen to take his own life, he would have woken up with Jesus. He's a Christian. And the epidemic of pornography, use, and sexual addiction within the church is epidemic. And the numbers are staggering. Pastor Mike likes to say that, you know, when David, one of the first things he did when he came back into town and we decided to attend is full disclosure, you know, to Mike. And Mike's like, well, you know, I don't ask anymore if men use porn when I do premarital counseling. I ask how much. And you know, and that's the transition between now and maybe 20 years ago. So this is out there, it's way too easy to access. So lie number one is this is not common in the church. Fact is, we're everywhere. We're all there. Just we don't know the story of the person sitting next to us. And it makes us uncomfortable. We don't like to talk about it because when you dare to preach this from the pulpit, every other woman's wondering about her husband or is struggling with her own lust problem. Because if you don't think the Hallmark movies and every stupid movie that elevates, you know, unrealistic expectations of sexuality or romance, they're all pornography. And we are just as vulnerable ladies, so guard your hearts. It's just that our gates are different. Our eye gate, not so much, but the gates of our hearts and our ears, very much. It's all porn. So just right there. So that's the first lie that I just want to shed a little light on. The second lie is that the church is equipped to handle this. It's a huge lie. It's a huge lie. We don't talk about it. Raise your hand if you've actually had an explicit sermon in your church about pornography.
Church.
No. We are not equipped. Beyond that, as my husband shares his story with me, as we open up, because I really was ignorant. We've been married for 23 4 years this June, and we'd been married 20 years when I figured this out, and I'm not a stupid person. Can I just say that? I mean, I don't think anyone who would meet me would say that I was stupid. We could talk about the statistics for getting into PA school. But it's, the shame. And it doesn't help that here I'm a woman who's repulsed. God had put such a repulsion within me for the sex trade industry anyway, for pornography, for sexual sin, that I think, it crushed him all the more inside. So the church is not equipped. My husband remembers hearing a sermon in a youth group where a visiting youth pastor on a retreat came in and told a group of junior high and high school boys that every time they masturbated, they were allowing demons into the room. He reached out multiple times to youth pastors over the years to be completely shut down. The answer we routinely give men and women engaged in sexual sin is read your Bible, pray more. Or my favorite, just stop doing it. I don't know how many of us, when confronted with a statement, will just stop sinning. Because we can't do it in our own power. Right. And we can't do it alone. Willpower is insufficient. Right. Pornography, all the newest addiction medicine research, and we're talking about science, not pseudoscience. We're talking about things coming down from the American Medical Association, link the stimulation associated with the viewing of pornography to the same areas of our brain that would be stimulated by a cocaine addiction. It is that much of a hit. It's self-medicating. This is not even about sex most of the time. Honestly, for most men, it has very little to do with sex. It has to do with self-medicating. It has to do with almost getting a hit. So, especially the men that are completely involved with it. So, as a church, we aren't equipped. That's the lie. Let's bring some light into this. So how do we become more equipped? We talk about it. I'm brave enough to stand up here by God's grace and talk about how God has restored our marriage. And you are brave enough, just like the people at the Gem Marriage Retreat, the first time we spoke, were brave enough to give my husband a standing ovation as I held his hand. And as we dispel darkness, as we recognize that people sitting alongside us have the same struggles, it begins to lose its power. Because then men can say, I need help. Come alongside me. Hold me accountable. For my husband, I think pornography and same-sex attraction issues were so not about wanting to have sex with other men or see other men that way. They were about the dearth of true, valuable male relationships, even within his own good Christian home. There may have been some sexual abuse involved. That's something we're still uncovering through therapy. He does act very much like a survivor of sexual abuse, but that's not anything that we've managed to dig to the bottom of yet. I knew that there's a history in his family, so it's neither here nor there, but we have to start talking about it. We have to start coming alongside. And to that end, he actually has established a group here in town that I have some information about. We also have a Samson Society, and these are Christian-based groups. There's also SA, which is Sex Addicts Anonymous, but some of those can be co-ed, and I think, for Christian men, that's not a good arena for them to be. So, and, another lie I would like to shed some light on is that women, that if you were a better wife, if you kept it that together, you kept a nicer home, if you did this, if you did that, that your husband would not be pornography. Sorry, I hate to tell you. One of the most freeing things I ever heard in my life is we shared with some very dear friends with who in Orlando when everything was falling apart. And my friend Mike looked at Kelly, my other dear friend, and he said, Heather? He's married to Heather and he does this? And I thought, my self-esteem was so destroyed at that point that I couldn't see myself as beautiful or worthy or anything else. But, I was a good mom. I kept a good house. It wasn't like we weren't being intimate with one another, except for spiritual intimacy. Nothing will kill off spiritual intimacy faster than hidden sin. And that may be pornography or anything else, but it did slowly destroy the spiritual intimacy in our marriage. So women, if you're struggling with this, please know it's not your fault. And I think the stigma, again, I work with wives all the time, and they're terrified. They're terrified that people will think less of them, and we're terrified that you'll think less of our husbands. Right. And even with so much information, I remember one wife thinking, no one's going to want my husband to be around their children, and it's like, he's not a pedophile, he's a sex addict. There's these are not interchangeable, yet we've so glommed everything together in darkness because we don't talk about it, because we don't follow the research. Interestingly enough, again, on the end of sexual research, they're finding that the next generation, so I have an almost 19-year-old son, they're finding people of my son's generation up into the early 30s that men are having a harder and harder time sustaining intimacy with their wives because the levels of stimulation that are required in their brain that are created in these artificial environments cannot match the way God intended for a man and a wife to be together. And so we have an endemic of prescriptions. We're seeing prescriptions for ED medicines just skyrocket in younger men, and they're linking it directly back to this epidemic. So the truth is it's not your fault. A lie is that your marriage can't survive this. I cannot, with God all things are possible. Your marriage can survive this. Ironically enough, again, the enemy trying to come in as I'm going through and trying to figure out my way today around negotiating how I'm going to pay for medical school. And it says, with the one excuse for student loans that you can file immediately and they'll forgive a foreclosure on your federal student loans? Divorce. So it wouldn't be enough for me to file an appeal saying that my husband's been recovering, we've lost jobs, we had cancer. Government doesn't care, but if I slapped out a certificate of divorce, so then all of a sudden I could go to med school. So I thought, isn't that interesting? That we don't live in a society that's driven by redemption. And one of the things that Dave and I look at it again and we wrestle with again and again, because we are so new to being recovered. This is something we're walking out. We're not perfect and we're not there. It's been a really long time, and something that you've walked in darkness for so long, it takes so much longer, to walk. We would never say, David wouldn't say, we're there. We don't even pretend to be. But God brings people into our lives, and I tend to interact with the wives slowly as they come through David's groups. And then I'll get a name here, a name there. We don't formally have a spouses group, and I'm in no position to lead one right now. But the prayer is that someday there will be one. There will be a support group for spouses as well. The materials are certainly there. But we look and we think, why? Why have we made it? Why have we made it? We see so many couples that haven't in the circles of people that we work with where the marriages just fall apart. So I want to talk about some of the turning points for us, and David outlined some of these too. The first is telling the truth. One of the conditions when David lost his job is that I told him that he could not come home until he had driven to his parents' house and confessed to his parents. And I will not lie, initially my motivation was anger and it was shame because I was so hurt and so destroyed. However, that being said, I had lived a marriage where my husband had held health on a pedestal for 20-something years. And when my mother-in-law just thought I was the luckiest girl in the world to be married to such a nice Christian young man, and wasn't my husband amazing? And why wasn't I more grateful, and why wasn't I more cheerful? And so I was kind of living under this umbrella, just like I felt like I often, if I had $1 for every nice Christian girl at church, said, oh, I wish I could grow up to marry somebody like David. And I would think, really? Because I was feeling ignored and neglected and uncared for, and I didn't understand why. And the why was he couldn't even take care of himself. So truth was an amazing thing, and an incredibly healing moment came when my in-laws came to me in tears, and they said to me, if you need to leave, we will support you financially, and we love you, and we are so sorry we didn't know. And the healing that came from being released from the blame of being the one that wasn't carrying my end of the marriage. So to have community support is amazing, and family support, but you have to talk about it. If we don't talk about it, we don't get support. So that was the first one. The second one came when my husband, and it didn't come until after he'd been in recovery for quite a while, was to be able to claim what he did. Not evade it, not sugarcoat it. The day he could come to me and say, I'm an adulterer. It doesn't matter that I never had contact with another real human being. What happened to us was a betrayal, and this was adultery, and I need to ask for forgiveness, and we need to start over. When he labeled it, labels can be bad or they can be really good. If I was sticking labels on my husband, it was really bad because my labels came from a place of woundedness and anger. But when he wore the label, he took all the power out of my throwing it, because he was like, yeah, that's what I am. And when we own our stuff, that's when God can step in. If we're not ready to own it, God can't work with us. He can't work with us in a place where we're not willing to open the door. And for him opening the door was to say, this goes beyond mental illness. This is, and he named it. So we have to be able to name it. That was huge. That was huge for us. And then for me, it was to release bitterness. There's a lot of proverbs about a contentious wife. And, I will say that even though by the time I moved to Gainesville, David and I had been more or less separated for 18 months, he came up here under the guise of, here's the new job, but Joshua needs to finish his senior year of high school. He's captain of the soccer team. And I basically said, go up there and decide what you want, because I can't live like this. You're welcome home on weekends and things like that, but I am not going until I know you have all this time. You have all the time in the world, and you have two choices of what to do with your time. You can go dive into your sin. You can go throw it all away. I'm giving you the freedom to throw it all away, or I'm giving you from Monday morning until Friday at 3 p.m. when you drive back to Orlando to work on what God would have you do. And praise God, that's what he chose to do. Got involved with a group here, ended up founding a group here when he couldn't find what he needed, established real accountability, honestly received the medical help that he needed. For my husband, so much of his issues had to do with unresolved mental health issues, which again, that could be a whole other talk about stigma in the church. But, and I look back and, it's mostly God's grace, but I had to release bitterness. I had to truly forgive my husband and come to a point where I could stand up and be, I love my husband. I want you to love my husband as much as I do. And that's where the fear and trembling comes in to talking about pornography addiction. So, what's the call here as a church? Let's be open to one another. Let's be transparent and real. Guys, it'll be the hardest conversation you ever have with your wife. And ladies, it'll be the hardest thing you ever ask, because I know how you don't want to, whether or not you want to say it to me right now or not, and that's okay. But talk about it, and talk about it with your children. Yeah. We waited too late with my oldest son. My husband was still in the early stages of recovery when my son was first discovered, and that was a breaking point for my husband. He sent us into church, and he locked himself in the car with our then 16-year-old and proceeded to tell him how this almost destroyed his life. In tears, and it was a huge point for them too. But again, light, bringing light into the darkness in our families, in our communities, and to know that there is help out there. Obviously, as a community, what can we do? Internet filters are a marvelous thing. Don't support the industry. And at the end of the day, I know that's hard to do and hard to say. But, filters are there for a reason. Do your homework. Find out, what does my internet server allow? What does my cable server allow? And to be respectful. I think, all things are permissible and not all things are beneficial. If somebody sets some really strong boundaries, know that they're not necessarily doing it for the wrong reasons. It's interesting. I was talking to another person, and there, as a couple, they were very terrified to share her husband's struggles because their family was unbelievers, and they thought it would damage his testimony so severely to admit this. But at the same time, the constant harassment he was getting from the family, if something came on TV, he would get up and leave the room, and they'd be like, oh, so-and-so, ha, 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 he just can't take it. So just to be mindful of those struggles that our people are going through. I also, like Jenny, feel like this is a privilege. Like I said, I go back to that woman who thought that the worst thing that would ever happen to me is that I would almost die, that I would lose my children, that I wouldn't see them graduate. I got to see 2 of them graduate high school so far. That I wouldn't get to do what I wanted or what I was called to do. But looking back, I see that all that anger that I pushed at God, it's funny, I always come back to this. I was never angry at God when I had cancer. How weird is that? Here I had this potentially life-threatening cancer, and I never for once felt angry at God. Like, I was really okay with it. Like, even to the point, like, I had this moment where I really was almost dying. I was like, well, okay, if this is what it's going to be, Lord, just take me out of this pain and let me wake up with you, and I know you're going to take care of my kids, and this is going to be awesome. I'm going to wake up with you. So I was really amazingly okay. And again, I wrote this incredible, fun, and inspirational devotional. I spoke on it. And then I got smacked in the face with this. And then my character showed. You saved me for this? For this? You brought me through cancer for this? Are you kidding me, God? And all the rage and all the hurt and all the betrayal. And it's funny because coming into Gainesville, joining GEM, so you're Deborah's daughters, going through the inner healing process, and God really using some of that to release bitterness, is that the night before we spoke for the first time at the GEM Marriage Retreat, which was such a high time of anxiety for both of us, and I tell you, I was kind of going over this and dancing with God in the backyard, and, can we do this? Yes, we can do this. I'm also not an extrovert, believe it or not. I know as a bar teacher, you probably have a really hard time believing it, but I'm not. I am an introvert. I will go home and hit the bathtub as soon as I'm out of here. But, it's not, I saved you so that you could experience this. It's Heather, I prepared you so that you were equipped, so that you knew the value of your life. That you know the value of my life in you, that power, all those things, all those places God prepared for was so that we could walk out our healing together. Again, Mindy has handouts. It's a very, very condensed version of my husband's testimony. We are happy. Our prayer is actually in our dream, so if you will pray with us, our dream, and Pastor Mike's on board with this actually, Steve Figley, local counselor who's wonderful, and Joanna, they're both on board. We would really like to see a pastors' conference happen right here in Gainesville. We would like to see the pastors of this community equipped and knowledgeable about this issue. And so I would like to see this life group right now that my husband leads grow, and not just grow but multiply. And I would like to see spouses groups, but it has to start with prayer. So we're happy to come speak. David's happy to come speak to men's groups. We're happy to meet with couples individually as long as you understand that we're just walking alongside you. We don't claim to be experts or anything else, but we are here to share our hearts and to shine light. And so I'm just so honored to shine light with so many other powerful stories tonight. So do you have any questions? I'm just kind of opening it up for a minute. I just appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I want to respect your time too. So, okay. Anything? Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Heather. May the Lord grow the seeds that you have planted tonight. And thank you for equipping us, dispelling those lies, and really giving us valuable information that I hope we can use to free it within our own families and within our communities. Thank you for starting that conversation in the church even here. Philip, you wanted to quickly share something with us. Please come.
So, exactly what where did Heather go? There you are. Exactly what you said. That it is being transparent and open is the greatest thing about being transparent and open is the enemy can't blackmail you anymore. Because when you're open, and then when you get to a point that you don't care about what people think about you, but you care about what the Father thinks about you, then the enemy can't blackmail you with that either. And absolutely true. It's if a man says that he's not dealing with it, you're right. He's not. He's giving into it. He's giving into it, and it's the truth. There's a book here. One of my very closest friends for the past 8 years, and some of you guys know, but a very successful person here in town, was into multiple things of sexual idolatry, prostitution, you name it, he did it. And he'll tell you his story, him and his wife's story. But he went to a place called PLM, Pure Life Ministries, and he was there for a year. Could have lost his whole practice. And when he came back, in our church, he was pretty much Mr. Popular, and everybody wanted to be around him and go on vacations with him and this and that. And kind of when he came back, everybody kind of stayed away from him like he had the plague. And me and my wife, we lived in New York City at the time, and we had just came back. And the Lord said, you need to befriend him. And I'm not one of those people that really goes after friends, so, I'm thinking, okay, I guess. But he was very humble. And I said, man, I want to hang around him because I want to be like that. I need to be more humble in my life. And so then he shared this book with me called At the Altar of Sexual Idolatry. And this book here, if you haven't read it, it's one of those books you read at least once a year. It's an absolute phenomenal book. Our church did it. Our pastor started a men's group. It started out with 170 men. It ended with 30.